Good morning, and you're all so welcome here today. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Jeanne McDonagh, and I'm the CEO of the Open Doors Initiative. I'm a white female with reddish, blondish, curly hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a black dress, and behind me is a picture of doors and a radiator, which is probably not the best background, but there we go. The Open Doors Initiative, Employers for Change and Towards Work have all come together today to celebrate the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. As such a person, it's an event very close to my heart, so I'm really glad we're doing this today. We want to honour all who strive, thrive and shine in the disability space, all those who contribute to a fair and equitable society for all, and who want to be part of that. This event will look at how employers can support the employment of people with disabilities, the positive experiences of employers and employees with disabilities, as well as an information session from the Department of Social Protection on the available grants and supports to employers and disabled job seekers. One thing I'd like to note is we had planned to have ISL interpretation for today's event, but unfortunately increased demand with the significant number of events around this day and that are being held this week meant we were unable to secure one despite our best efforts. We hope that the live captioning provided today will be a useful accessibility tool to the audience, and a fully captioned recording of today's event will be made available. So a little about Open Doors. We're a group of over 100 companies and NGOs who work with government to create pathways to education and employment for marginalised people. These can be internships, scholarships, training courses, aiding entrepreneurs, or full and part-time employment for people from a range of backgrounds and abilities. These we develop on a bespoke basis with organisations, and they include specific projects such as Employers for Change and Towards Work. The people we work with include refugees, asylum seekers and migrants, disadvantaged youth, people with all disabilities, the travelling community, ex-offenders, LGBTQI, and anyone who needs our help from a marginalised background. And any, of course, any intersectionality between the various groups. I would now like to welcome an address by the Minister for State at the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Robert Troy TD, to mark this occasion.
I'm delighted to be asked to provide the opening address for your celebration of International Day of Persons with Disabilities. I want to commend all the groups on here for their valuable work for people with disabilities, whether it is providing access to training, mentoring, information, or advice for employers, all services that are vital to allow persons with disabilities to access employment. One of the core objectives of my department is a commitment to inclusion, with an equality of opportunity for all, regardless of disability, gender, civil or family status, sexual orientation, religious belief, age or race. My department seeks to ensure that its duty for promotion of inclusion and provision of sustainable employment in a post-pandemic society is fulfilled. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities sets out guiding principles to promote, protect and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms of all persons with disabilities. My department contributed constructively to Ireland's initial state report to the UN Convention. We are aware that engaging in employment has a positive impact, not just financially, but also on a person's health and well-being that leads to a better outcome and a sense of self-worth. Ireland's whole of government strategy is key to developing robust, effective and deliverable policy. Although the policy for disability primarily lies with the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, every department has a role to play. Officials from my department are represented in the steering groups led by the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth for the National Disability Inclusion Strategy and the comprehensive employment strategy for people with disabilities. Both groups play an important role in monitoring implementation of government policy on disability matters across the public service. My department, through its offices and agencies, advocates inclusion of persons with disabilities in the workplace. There are many positive initiatives underway. For example, Enterprise Ireland, who are developing a diverse and inclusion strategy. A critical component of this strategy is to support self-employment and entrepreneurship for persons with a disability. In March of this year, Enterprise Ireland, in partnership with the NDA, held a Universal Design webinar. It focused on how inclusive and universal design principles provide opportunities in entrepreneurship for people with disabilities. IDA Ireland will develop a pilot initiative in cooperation with other stakeholders aimed at enhancing the ability of job candidates with diverse backgrounds to avail of employment opportunities in foreign direct investment companies. In preparation, they will review the existing graduate supports to IDA companies and consult with stakeholders, after which it is hoped to launch a pilot in September 2022. The Employment Equality Act legally obliges employers to support the requirements of both employees and potential employees, including persons with a disability. Denial of this support can be cause for action under the Acts amounting to discrimination on disability grounds. The equality legislation covers employment and employment-related areas, including equal pay, promotion, training and working conditions, and thus prohibits such discrimination. The WRC deals with all complaints of discrimination, including those in the workplace. The WRC will continue to make referrals under the Equal Status Acts, providing protection and positive outcomes for persons with a disability. Within my department, there is a Disability Consultative Committee which provides a focus for disability inclusion in respect of our policy work, schemes and initiatives. Membership comprises of stakeholders from the NDA as well as representatives of the Disability Stakeholder Group. In addition, the Disability Liaison Officer within my department organises placements for persons with disabilities through the Willing Able Mentoring Program. I note that my department has reached a target of 4.66% employment of persons with disabilities, which is in line with the government's commitment to increase to 6% by 2024. While this is positive progress, we need to be more ambitious. A cross-departmental monitoring group is in place to ensure government targets are being met. I was also encouraged to learn that my department has engaged with the Oireachtas Work Learning Programme. The Oireachtas Work Learning Programme provides an opportunity for young adults with an intellectual disability to experience work in the public service. Upon completion, they have the necessary skills to gain sustainable employment. The onus on engagement with the issues that help to improve employment opportunities for persons with a disability is embedded across the department, its offices and its agencies. This entails taking a collaborative approach through committee and stakeholder engagement and ensuring the necessary supports are not only easily but readily available. Changing attitudes, raising awareness, supporting individuals with disability produces positive outcomes that are beneficial to the entire workforce as well as society overall. We aim to continue to achieve the objectives, goals and recommendations that enable accessible, inclusive and sustainable opportunities for persons with disabilities. I wish to thank you for the invitation to give this opening address, and I wish you well with the rest of your event.
Good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's event. My name is Christabelle Feeney. I am a white female with long blonde hair and blue eyes, and today I'm wearing a black turtleneck dress with a rose gold necklace, seated in front of a white, purple and teal virtual background. I'm the Director of Employers for Change, an employer disability information service. We are delighted to have had the open address this morning from Minister Robert Troy, Minister of State at the Department of Enterprise, and to hear his commitment to disability inclusion, which is in all of our interests and which does require cross-departmental cooperation and collaboration. Employers for Change was launched in March of this year by Taoiseach Micheál Martin, Sinead Burke, CEO of Tilting the Lens, and Francesca McDonagh, CEO of Bank of Ireland. Since our launch, we have worked with a variety of employers across the length and breadth of the country to raise their disability awareness and to ensure that disability inclusion is put front and centre of their agenda. You can find more details about our work and our service at employersforchange.ie. We know that as of the 2016 census, there were approximately 650,000 people living with a disability in Ireland. That's 1 in 7 people. And yet only 36.5% of disabled people were in employment, compared to 72.8% of their non-disabled peers. So the next topic is one of great importance. How can employers support the employment of people with disabilities? We have a wonderful speaker for this session, Fiona Ferris, who's Deputy Chief Executive Officer at AsIam, Ireland's national autism charity. Fiona has worked with AsIam since 2017, initially in the role of early years specialist, but assumed the role of Deputy CEO in 2019 and oversees the training department within AsIam. Fiona delivers talks both nationally and internationally about autism, neurodiversity and disability, while contributing her own experiences as an autistic adult and a parent to a child on the spectrum. In today's talk, Fiona will aim to give practical, relatable knowledge and strategies to assist employers in supporting employees and potential employees with disabilities. So I'm delighted now to hand over to Fiona.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and thank you so much to Christabelle and to Jeanne for the great introduction. Like I said, I'm absolutely delighted to be invited along today to deliver this talk with the topic being inclusive employment, which of course is a really important discussion to be having, particularly this week, but also at all times, because like you've just heard, the numbers in relation to people with disabilities and employment are just not very favourable. And it's also important to mention as well, as an autistic adult, in that census information that's gathered, it doesn't include autistic people because no information is gathered statistically about autistic people in the census. So that would contribute even further to the numbers if that were the case. I'm just going to share my screen to bring my presentation up, and then I'll give a little bit more of an introduction. Okay, you should all be able to see that now. So just to give you a little bit of background on myself, and thanks so much again, Christabelle, for the lovely introduction. I work for AsIam. I've been with AsIam since 2017. My role within AsIam is Deputy CEO, but I oversee the Training and Accreditation Department. A lot of the work we do within the Training and Accreditation Department is to try and educate society about what it is like to be autistic and what you can do to support autistic and neurodivergent people. We have found that as autistic people, a lot of the barriers that we experience aren't actually anything to do with being autistic or with being disabled. They're to do with how society chooses to respond. That's something that we really want to change in Ireland. Sometimes whenever we're talking about disability supports, we tend to look at how we can provide supports for the person to adapt into society, when what really needs to happen is to be met halfway. So society needs to be educated as well on what they can do to support people living with disabilities. Now, the word disability is something that many people are sometimes afraid to say. You know, they're afraid of offending somebody, or they're afraid of getting it wrong, or perhaps of you know, saying the word disability when in fact somebody doesn't identify as being disabled. But that word is becoming a lot more mainstreamed, which is what we want. We want people to feel comfortable in using the word disability, in owning the fact that they are a member of the disabled community, and changing the narrative around what it means to be disabled. So there are many autistic people who identify as a disabled person, but acknowledge that it is not in fact their autism that disables them. It's society that they're disabled by. It's the barriers that exist within society that disable them from being able to participate. And of course, that is the case right across the disabled community. It's not the person themselves, it's everybody and everything else that surrounds the person that is in fact disabling them from being able to participate and, you know, just be part of their community, be part of their workplace. The barriers exist surrounding the person, not within the person. So that's something that I feel quite strongly about. I identify as a disabled person, but again, I don't feel that it's my autism that disables me. I believe that it's the barriers that exist within society. So I was diagnosed at the age of 15 with autism, and the way in which my diagnosis was communicated to me was very negatively. It was, well, this is why you can't do this, and this is why you can't do that, and this is why this is more difficult for you. And I always look back and wonder, had there been somebody who said to me, well, Fiona, do you know the way you're really good at this? Or do you know the way you're really strong in this area? That's because you're autistic. And there wasn't any of that. It was just a big list of things that I couldn't do as well as other people. And whenever you are disabled, and whenever you do have a brain that works differently to everybody else, there are going to be things that you don't do in the way that other people expect. But there are also going to be a lot of things that you do so much better, or in a way that's really different, that is actually a strength. So what that led to was the next 10 years of me not disclosing the fact that I was autistic, that I was a member of the disabled community, and that just placed even more barriers in my way. The way in which disability was communicated to me was so negative that I didn't actually want to be a part of it. It wasn't until I suppose around 2011, 2012, when my own daughter was diagnosed, that I was able to see it through a different lens, but I was still seeing the same response. Whenever I was trying to explain to people why she couldn't do this, or why she couldn't do that, or why the sensory environment was so overwhelming, why she wasn't able to answer to her name, it was because she was autistic, I was still getting the same response of, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Or, well, you wouldn't know to look at her. And that's not the response, really. That's not a helpful response. There are invisible disabilities out there, and we shouldn't be judging what we understand to be a disability based on what we see. So it was around that time that I realized I need to start speaking more openly and honestly about being autistic. Now, to that point as well, I'd experienced massive difficulties with employment. Now, because of my great ability to mask as an autistic person, which, by the way, isn't a good thing, but it's something that many autistic people are familiar with, I never found difficulty in getting a job. But the anxiety I had within the job meant that I was never able to stay very long, or I was only able to work part-time. And that was to do with the sensory environment. It was to do with the differences in communication, with the unpredictability. All of those things placed barriers in my way to being fully employed and on a full-time basis, which I'm more than capable of. It wasn't until I started disclosing the fact that I was autistic, and I suppose speaking more openly and honestly, as I said, and I came across AsIam, which is the first time I've actually been able to work full-time. And that's because within AsIam, being different, being autistic is actually the norm. So needing reasonable accommodations, adapting communication styles, adapting the sensory environment, having all of the accommodations you need in order to be comfortable, in order to participate for a full day, that's what the difference is, really, from being able to work full-time and not being able to cope in a working environment. So something that we're very proud of in AsIam is that a team of around 22, half of us are autistic or neurodivergent. So whenever we're talking about reasonable accommodations, whenever we're talking about inclusive employment, or just educating people more broadly about what it means to be neurodivergent or have a hidden disability, we're doing so from the lived experience and from that perspective. And that's something that I am very proud of within our organization, but it's also the reason why I feel that we have been so instrumental and so involved in this conversation that's taking place around inclusive employment at the moment. So some of the slides that I'm going to be using are actually from a module that we developed from funding that we received from the NDA, and was developed in partnership with Rehab, Walk and Not So Different, and it's specifically on the subjects of inclusive employment, recruitment and retention, which are all very important topics. And the reason that I'm using some of the slides is because I'd like people to see, practical strategies. I'd like people to see exactly what is helpful within the workplace. But also, if you want any further information, or if you want to see the module that has been developed, just contact us in AsIam and we'll be able to provide you access to that. Now, something I did forget to do was give a visual description of myself at the beginning. I just remembered halfway through. So I'm a white female, I have blue eyes, and I'm wearing glasses. My hair is dark at the top and it's blonde at the bottom, and I'm wearing noise cancelling headphones. I'm wearing a black top with white dots on it, and my background is blurred. So I'm going to move along to the next slide, and I'll be talking until around just before 11 o'clock. If there's any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and hopefully we'll get time to get to those at the end. So I did mention just there in my introduction about hidden disabilities. Often whenever we think of, or whenever we talk about disabilities, we have a picture in our head of what it looks like to be disabled. We expect to be able to tell from meeting somebody or from looking at somebody that they are living with a disability. And of course, for many people, that is not the case. There are many hidden disabilities where by meeting somebody, you will not be able to tell if they're experiencing barriers to inclusion. You may not be able to tell the difficulties they may have with communication, with the sensory environment, with employment, with, accessing healthcare. We cannot tell from meeting somebody if they are disabled. So it's really important to try and, I suppose, break the current narrative around that disabled doesn't look like something. Disabled is something. What it means to be disabled will be very different from one person to the next. So you might have seen, actually, recently, I've noticed anyway, whenever you go to a shopping centre, some of the signs on the bathrooms will say not all disabilities are visible. And I think that's such a positive move, because there are times myself, I remember bringing my own daughter to the bathroom. I wouldn't be able to bring her into a public bathroom because the noise of the hand dryers would be overwhelming for her and it would cause her to go into meltdown. But then me as a parent bringing a child into a bathroom without a visible disability, there's been so many times where people have said, you shouldn't be using that. And that's because of the attitude that we should be able to tell from looking at somebody whether they're disabled or not. So something I really want to communicate as part of the talk today is exactly that. There are so many hidden disabilities, and we shouldn't judge from meeting somebody whether they're going to need reasonable accommodations, whether they're going to need extra support. And in fact, it's actually just best practice to give everybody individualized support, whether they're disabled or not. So the end goal really is that nobody should need to disclose the fact they have a disability to have their needs met within the workplace. But for the purpose of today's conversation and the fact there are so many people here today who are wanting to learn more, wanting to do their best, they may be part of the disabled community, or you may be an ally to the disabled community. So I really wanted to touch on just some key things to know and some key practical strategies that will be helpful for you. So in terms of employment opportunities, today the topic is, of course, employment. Employment can be particularly tricky for disabled people. And again, the reason for that isn't anything to do with the person's disability. It's to do with the lack of accessibility of environments, the lack of accessibility within society, and the lack of understanding surrounding what it means to reasonably accommodate somebody. Sometimes there's a fear out there, particularly in the area of neurodiversity, that, well, I couldn't possibly support them. I don't know anything about that. And that's okay. It's okay not to know. What isn't okay is to not try. So if you don't know, the best thing you can do is consult, is to talk to the person, to ask them exactly what accommodations they might require, what they need from you, what will help you to be able to be happy and comfortable in work. But this barrier, this lack of understanding, and these inaccessible environments and the barriers that exist within workplaces mean that people with disabilities are 2.5 times less likely to have a job than people without disabilities. In terms of autistic people, 85% of autistic people are long-term unemployed or underemployed. And that's nothing to do with inability to work. That's nothing to do with not wanting to work. It's entirely to do with lack of understanding and sometimes fear of doing the wrong thing, not knowing what you can do as an employer, as a colleague, as a manager, that is going to provide this person with the access to work, with their right to work. You know, this is rights-based, and we did hear at the beginning from the Minister about the WRC and about, you know, it can be a discrimination issue. As a disabled person, we really don't want it to be a case that employers are doing this because of a rights-based issue. Like, even though it is entirely a rights-based issue, we want, you know, just the same opportunities as everybody else. And we want employers and managers and workplaces to value and to celebrate people with disabilities and the differences and the strengths that they can bring to the workplace. So in a survey that we recently conducted as part of our partnership with Irish Jobs, and we actually just launched our Same Chance Charter toolkit in the last week, which will give employers and workplaces, again, practical strategies and resources to be a more inclusive workplace. But at the beginning of this partnership, we did conduct some research into exactly what the attitudes are that surround autism. 75% of autistic people surveyed in autism in the workplace said that they would not tell their employer that they were autistic for fear of being treated differently or less favorably, or of, you know, just the stigma that still surrounds disability and neurodivergence. 72% said that they need to mask their autism in the workplace in order to interact with colleagues. What that means is 72% of people said they need to pretend and act like they're not autistic in order to interact with their colleagues. Only 29% of companies surveyed were aware that they had an autistic person on their team, which makes sense whenever you see the percentage of people who wouldn't tell their employer. 56% of companies had challenges filling roles, whereas 85% believed autistic people could make a positive contribution. 4 in 5 autistic people faced barriers to finding the job they would like, yet 75% of organizations believe that their recruitment processes are accessible for autistic people. So there is a huge disconnect there. There's a huge gap between those two figures, those two statistics. And the only way to fill that is by increasing understanding, by mainstreaming the knowledge that surrounds supporting people with disabilities, including autism. Now, I know I'm going to be referring to autism a lot, but that is my background and that is my own personal experience. But the barriers that autistic people experience are very often the same barriers that the broader disabled community face as well. So disability, I did reference that term at the beginning, and sometimes people don't like to use the term disability or disabled, but the fact that, you know, that is something that we're trying to mainstream the use of that word. We're trying to encourage people to be proud to be part of the disabled community, to advocate for their own needs, what it means to be a disabled person. But disability results from the interaction between these three things: the personal characteristics, and this means the differences that a person experiences, the differences that perhaps are characteristic of their disability. So for example, for an autistic person, they may find communication difficult, they may find the sensory environment to be overwhelming, they may find noise difficult, they may find the lights to be too bright, they may find the workday to be unpredictable. So these are kind of personal characteristics that are related to their disability. Environmental barriers, so barriers that exist within the workplace that actually place a stop between the person being able to participate in the working day, in accessing the same rights that everybody else gets to within the workplace. So you see here a picture of a person in a wheelchair and stairs, and you would be surprised the amount of environments that are still not wheelchair accessible, or are wheelchair accessible under the Disability Act or under the Equal Status Act, but perhaps if you've an adapted wheelchair or if there are crowds, it's still incredibly difficult to get the same access as everybody else. And the third is the attitudinal barriers, the barriers that exist from lack of understanding or the preconceptions we might have about what it means to be disabled and what it means about whether this person can do the job as effectively as anybody else. So you see there, he might not be able to do this job because he has a disability. We did an Attitudes to Autism survey 2 years ago, and a surprisingly high percentage of people said that they didn't believe an autistic person would be able to do the same kind of job as them, which, you know, is entirely incorrect, but again, is just, that's just the misunderstanding and the misconceptions that surround disability, and comes from, I suppose, the stereotypical narrative that surrounds disability, the way in which it's presented in the media, the way in which, you know, it's presented in books. It's usually these kind of inspirational stories that aren't actually reflective at all of what it means in real life to live with a disability day to day. So this is what disability is. It's the combination of the three, but for some reason, we tend to only focus on the tip of the iceberg. So there's the individual factors, which are, as I mentioned, the personal characteristics, but then that's only part of the picture. The bigger part of the picture is the environmental barriers and the attitudinal barriers. If we were able to change the sensory environment, or give the person the tools that they need to communicate clearly, but didn't actually change anything about our culture or our attitude or our understanding of disability within the workplace, that person is still going to be disabled by their surroundings. They might have the immediate accommodations they need, but the cultural accommodations haven't been addressed. So for some reason, we tend to still only address accommodations on the face of it, based on what we can see. But unless we're addressing barriers, or unless we're addressing accessibility from a whole of workplace culture, we're not actually going to reach a point where that person is able to fully participate or realize their rights as an individual within the workplace the same way that everybody else has the opportunity to. So here we see a visual that says we want equitable employment opportunities, and it is two people communicating using sign language. Equitable is a word that we are hearing more and more often. Now, equality is another word that was probably used more so until recently, and this came around the time that it became very popular to do diversity, inclusion, and equality training. Now, this looks different for every workplace, and it looks different depending on what your CSR responsibilities are, whether you have a particular commitment to the disabled community, to the neurodivergent community, to the LGBTQ plus community, to the traveling community, etc. There's so many different ways of addressing equality, diversity, and inclusion, and most companies tend to kind of have one core group or principle that they wish to address. Now, in terms of equality, there's so many talks I've given that whenever I go into a workplace, and I'm speaking specifically about autism in these talks, somebody will say to me to begin with, you know, we've already done our equality, diversity, inclusion training. I imagine some of this will be the same, so don't be offended if there are people coming and going, or, you know, if there are people who are perhaps not tuned in. It could be that we've heard this before, and that always gets my back up. That drives me mad from the beginning, because there is no one idea of what it means to engage in equality, diversity, and inclusion training. So I usually start off those talks by saying, okay, what is equality? Like, can anybody tell me what equality is? And usually there's silence, you know, because nobody wants to be the person to put their hand up. Nobody wants to be the person to address, you know, all of their peers or their managers and then get it wrong. But there will usually be one person who says, well, equality is treating everybody the same. You know, it's making sure that we're not treating anybody differently. Everybody's treated the same regardless of disability, gender, race, religion, etc. That's correct. Equality is treating everybody the same. And that's not what we want. That's not what helps. You know, until quite recently, it was seen as the right thing to do. But here I have a visual of equality versus equity. So in the first visual, you'll see 3 different height men standing on the same size box, trying to look over a fence. Now, the very small child who's standing in the box cannot see over the fence. The middle-sized man who's standing in the box can see over the fence, you know, has a clear enough view, better than the child. And then the fully grown man who's standing in the box can see really well, can see clearly, you know, no barriers in his way. They're all being given the same accommodation. they're all being treated exactly the same, but that's not giving them the same access rights. You know, so treating everybody the same under this heading of equality isn't actually realizing that person's rights to individual and reasonable accommodations as an individual. That's, I'm emphasizing the word individual there. And just to give another example of that, I mentioned I'm wearing glasses. I have quite bad eyesight, so my prescription is about -3. So I don't want anybody on this webinar to feel any differently or to feel like they're being treated any differently to anybody else. So I'm going to give all of you a pair of these glasses with a prescription of -3. How many of you will that disable? How many of you will now not be able to see well? How many of you will now probably be able to see better than you were before? You know, that it's the same accommodation, but you're giving it to everybody regardless of their need. What we're actually trying to achieve is equity, equitable opportunities. The difference between equality and equity is that you're not treating everybody the same. You're treating everybody differently. You're giving everybody the individual supports that they require in order to meet their potential, whatever that might be to them. So in this visual, you'll see the child is standing in 2 boxes and can see over the fence. The middle-sized man is standing on 1 box and can see over at the same level as the child. And the man is just standing on the ground with no box, and all 3 can see over at exactly the same level. So in order for all of these 3 men to have equal opportunity to be able to access the football game that they're watching in the same way, they all have to be given equitable accommodations, equitable accessibility. They're given the chance to realize their own potential by giving the individual supports that they require. So that's why I said in the last slide, what we want is equitable employment opportunities. The employers to realize that actually everybody in my team will need to be treated very differently if I want them to be able to perform to their fullest. So in terms of job advertising, whenever we talk about employment, sometimes we tend to, sorry, I'm just going to bring all these points up. We tend to only think about once the person's in the job. You know, we've gone through the advertising process, we've gone through the interview process, you know, they've had their induction, they've had their onboarding, and now they work here. How do we become an inclusive employer? But actually the employment process begins the second you advertise the job. That is when you are appealing to people and letting them know, well, actually, we welcome you as a disabled person. We welcome you as a wheelchair user. We welcome you as an autistic person, and we will value your contributions. This is your opportunity to reach that community and say, we totally embrace this culture. So in terms of job advertising, there's just a few points I wanted to point out. So make sure your commitment to diversity is very clear. It's not something that should only be communicated before the interview or, you know, in the job contract. It's something that should be quite prominent within the advertisement itself. So I have a visual here that says, join our team. We are an equal opportunities employer. Reasonable accommodations will be provided. Make your commitment to diversity clear. Engage in disability recruitment events. So we've heard the harrowing statistics and numbers that surround unemployment in the disabled community and the autistic community. So many disabled people are going to be involving themselves in disability recruitment agencies and events that are run by those agencies in order to gain employment, knowing that the companies and the employers that are coming to these events are actively looking for people like them and understand what kind of accommodations that they might need. So as an employer, it's really important that if you are really committed to having a diverse team, to employing people from the disabled community, engaging in disability recruitment events is an excellent way of communicating that. Consider your use of imagery, font, and language. This is so important. So it's not just, you know, obviously that's important in terms of people who have visual impairment, for people perhaps who are colorblind even, that's important too. But for people who are autistic, I can't actually emphasize how important this is. Depending on what font it is, that will entirely be the reason why I do or don't read something. If it's a font that's difficult to read, if the spacing is too close together, I'm unable to read it and I just won't engage with it. Also, there was a time about a year ago where we were consulting with a very large multinational employer. I'm not going to mention any names, obviously, but they had put an ad out online specifically looking for autistic people and not understanding why no autistic people were applying. I looked at the job advertisement and there was a photo of a man sitting at his desk with his hand on his head and his face down, and he looked stressed beyond belief. And I just thought, is this the picture that you're using to communicate what work life is going to be like? This person looks stressed, he looks overloaded, he looks overworked. And, you know, many people, many non-disabled or neurotypical people wouldn't pay much attention to what the imagery is communicating. But for autistic people, particularly, we understand communication visually. So we're going to be processing more about the picture than we are about the words that are used alongside the picture. So imagery is very important as well. Make it clear exactly what skills you're looking for. I can't tell you the amount of job advertisements I've read that say, you know, are you looking for a fun place to work? You know, are you a great team player with excellent communication skills? What has that actually got to do with the day-to-day skills somebody requires in the role? So excellent communication skills, what does that mean? You know, what does it mean to be an excellent communicator? Everybody communicates differently. It's so individual. I think it's become a real trendy and modern thing to try and make your job advertisements, you know, different or stand out, or, you know, talk about how great a workplace it is, but without actually communicating what this person needs in order to be able to work here. You know, that's a barrier to begin with. Say exactly what qualifications they need, what skills they need, what experience they need in the job advertisement. Make it as clear as you possibly can. So in the interview process, let me just go through all my points here again. So small steps that can make a huge difference in the interview process. Interviews are terrifying. Okay, there's no roundabout way of saying that. I don't think there's anybody really who enjoys interviews. And if you do, I mean, that's amazing. But I haven't come across anybody who enjoys interviews. They're nerve-wracking, they're stressful. You know, sometimes you're awake all night going over potential questions in your head. What if they try to trip me up on this? You know, what if I can't even access the interview room? These are real questions that the disabled community will be asking themselves. So I have a few points to go through here. So avoid abstract thinking and hypothetical questions. Now in AsIam, we have an inclusive interview process. We conduct our interviews very differently. So there is nothing unpredictable about them. Before the person comes along, we send them a visual guide of what the interview room looks like, what processes they're going to have to go through to get to the interview room. We tell them what the lights are like. We show them pictures of the people who are going to be in the room. We tell them the structure of the interview, but we actually go a step further and we give them the questions. So we give them a full list of questions that could potentially be asked in the interview, because we don't believe that a person should, or we don't believe that a person is able to show them full selves by thinking on the spot to answer a question, you know, whenever they've had to take time to consider what that question is actually asking them. We also make a point of saying there are no trick questions here. There are no right or wrong answers. You know, we just want your insight. And we also say, before the person comes to the interview, what reasonable accommodations do you need in the interview? Not in the job, in the interview. So do you need people to not wear perfume? Do you need people to not wear bright colors? Do you need the lights to be turned off? If you're delivering a presentation, do you want us to switch the projector off immediately afterwards? You know, these are things that are real considerations for an autistic person. I remember going for the interview for AsIam myself and getting this guide before I went into the interview, being told what to expect, being told that I could have the projector switched off afterwards. And I just thought, this is somewhere I know I can work. This is somewhere that's really going to understand me, because they're asking these things without me having to tell them. And I wouldn't have said, I'd have been too afraid to ask. So the first time I walked into an interview and I disclosed right away the fact that I was autistic, and I wouldn't have done that had all the reasonable accommodations not been outlined to begin with. I just knew that this was an organization that was going to understand me and what I needed to be able to work effectively here. Make the process clear and unambiguous. So like I said, a visual guide, I mean, that doesn't just have to be for autistic or disabled people. It could be for everybody. Everybody likes to be prepared. Everybody likes to know what to expect. Reasonable accommodations and sensory adaptations. So reasonable accommodations from a physical perspective, you know, ensuring that the interview room is in an accessible space, a wheelchair accessible space, is not in a sensory intense environment with bright lights or air conditioning or, you know, glary windows with no blinds. These are things that are going to decrease the likelihood of the person performing to their full potential. Adopt a strengths-based or practical approach to the interview. So I said at the beginning as well that I didn't actually refer to it, avoid abstract thinking and hypothetical questions. How many times have you been in an interview and somebody said, you know, tell me about yourself? Like, you're going to want to narrow it down a bit. Like, tell me about yourself. I'm going to tell you everything from the second I was 2. You know, exactly which part do you want to hear about here? Be specific. Tell me about what you enjoyed about college, or tell me about a time where you use problem-solving skills, not tell me about yourself. Or another one is talk me through your CV. That's a good alternative to tell me about yourself. Hypothetical questions. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Like, what was that going to tell you about a person? Nobody knows where they're going to be in 5 years' time. Nobody can give a genuine, real answer to that. Focus on the now, focus on what this person can contribute to the role. And then that point there, adopt a strengths-based or practical approach to the interview. Think about what the job is. So for example, if I'm interviewing somebody for a training officer position, I'm going to ask them to deliver a training session on a topic that they would come across quite a lot within their role. So for an employment training officer, you know, deliver me a presentation on creating an inclusive workplace. You know, then I'm going to be able to see the person's real ability to do this job and not judge them on answering a load of questions that aren't actually that relevant to performing the role. Consult and prepare ahead of the interview. And again, this ties back to the reasonable accommodations, to making the process clear, but consulting with the person, you know, phoning them, or if they can't use the phone, having a Zoom call, or communicating with them in a way that is appropriate for them to ask exactly what will make this interview process inclusive and accessible for them. In terms of the environment and the sensory environment, it's important to think about the waiting time before the interview as well. How many times have you been sitting there waiting for 10, 15 minutes while the person before you is still talking? And this is the part where anxiety starts to go through the roof. So making sure it's not just the interview room, but the waiting area that's accessible. So be mindful of that. Ensure there's no irritating noises, no irritating smells, no chatter or people coming and going, or, you know, beside an open window. Just try to be mindful of the sensory environment, except the person may need to move around or pace or stim, which for autistic people, stimming is kind of a repetitive movement, like flicking your fingers or rocking back and forward, jumping up and down, or fidget with something. And that's perfectly reasonable. There's no reason why we shouldn't allow somebody to do that. During the interview as well, try and ensure there's only one person speaking at a time. And if you have rounds of questions, try and finish one person's round before you move to the next, so that it's not constantly moving between 3 or 4 different people. Try and make it as structured as possible. And then the last 2 as well, again, just with the sensory environment in the interview, consider the lighting. What's the lighting like? Is it strip lighting? Can we turn this off? Can we use more natural light? You know, lighting can be a real factor for people with visual impairments and for autistic and neurodivergent people. Avoid anything distracting yourself. As an interviewer, try not to be, you know, clicking your pen, try not to be fidgeting, try not to be, this is actually particularly difficult whenever you're an autistic interviewer. I'm trying to ensure that I'm accommodating a potentially autistic employee while making sure that I'm not being distracting at the same time. But it's really important as an interviewer that you're making this as comfortable and non-distracting as experience as possible. So I want to talk you through a little case study. This is something that was conducted as part of that training that I mentioned earlier, the NDA training in partnership with Rehab Group Walk and Not So Different. So a case study about an autistic person who was finding it difficult to gain employment. His name is Nick. His real name is Nick. And if you ever come to any AsIam employment talks, you might have come across him. So Nick had an honours degree in computer science, but was experiencing difficulty in getting a job. He had difficulty in social situations and sensory issues around fabrics. Dressing in suits were irritating his skin. So basically he was going to numerous interviews wearing a tracksuit and being highly skilled, highly qualified and highly knowledgeable in his area, but being refused the second round interview because he wasn't wearing a suit or a shirt and tie, which is quite typical of interview attire. So interviews for him were the barrier to getting the job. Consultation took place with specialists, starting with AsIam and with the employer in the end, where he was able to successfully gain employment in the global software company that he had applied to. But what types of accommodations might have enabled him to succeed? So he was told he could wear tracksuits and trainers to accommodate his biggest sensory need. You know, he wasn't in a customer-facing role. There was no need for him to be wearing a suit or a shirt and tie day to day. So why was this expected in the interview? He benefited from job coaching as well, which helped get him into a work routine. It helped familiarize himself with the internal work processes, with how things are done here, with how to work with other members of the team. And he benefited from a good job match. The product support role didn't require high levels of social interaction or with engaging with anybody. And he was able to focus on his core strengths in IT to resolve customer software issues, which was actually his interest. He now wants to use his product support skills to progress into a more senior software development role within the company. So this is a real case study. But from the more human side of it, Nick is now a manager in that company. And 2 years ago, he got his first mortgage. These are things that he would not have been able to access had an interviewer not changed their own mindset to, you know, not require somebody to wear a shirt and tie to come to an interview. Something that whenever you think about it is so trivial, so unimportant, and look at just how much that person has contributed to the company and being able to, you know, realize his own personal goals and potential and get the same access to other things in his personal life as a result of having this job. You know, it's really important that we look at the bigger picture here. You know, the barrier between this highly skilled and highly knowledgeable person getting a job was a shirt and tie. Like, that's just something we really need to think about whenever it comes to reasonable accommodations. So onboarding and progression, I know that I'm nearly at time, so I'm going to fly through these next few. So I spoke earlier about, you know, with the image of the iceberg, there really needs to be a whole team or whole of culture approach to disability awareness. It can't just be with the manager. It can't just be with the immediate colleagues, because you're only as inclusive as your least inclusive staff member. So try and make the whole workforce engage in the embracing of the diverse culture, embrace the strengths and the attributes that having a diverse work culture brings. It's not just about accepting, it's about celebrating and valuing. There should be a discussion during the onboarding process of preferred communication style. Do you prefer to have phone calls? Do you prefer to have Zoom calls? Do you prefer to have face-to-face meetings? Would you rather I emailed you the points in advance to consider, or would you rather we discussed it and then I followed up with an email? Make sure that you create a person-specific work plan. So, you know, don't talk about the broader macro organization as a whole in the work plan initially. Focus on what this person's specific responsibilities are and then how this contributes, because this person needs to be quite clear on exactly what their role is. Agree reasonable accommodations, which again are individual and cultural. What do they need in order to be the best versions of themselves in this role? What can we do? What can we change as an employer, as an organization, to meet your needs. Explain what the workplace culture and norms and unwritten rules are. It's not often the job that is difficult for the person. It's all the grey areas, the unwritten rules, the smoke breaks, who buys the tea bags whenever we run out. You know, these are the things that are never explained, but you're just expected to understand. And whenever you have a brain that works differently to everybody else, it's totally foreign to you. And a mentoring system is a really effective tool to help a person get the same career progression opportunities that everybody else has access to. It's not just about a person having a job or giving them a job, but making sure they get the opportunity to realize the career progression opportunities that everybody wants within their career. It's not just, you know, having a job somewhere you can go from 9 to 5. I want to be able to progress in this. I want to be able to succeed and thrive in this role and ultimately be manager one day or be head of a team one day, whatever that own person's potential or goals are. And just to finish on this slide, you know, reasonable accommodations and becoming an inclusive employer or workplace, it is a nice thing to do. It really is. And it's really helpful whenever you're a disabled person to see that a workplace is actively putting measures in place to become inclusive, to embrace your culture or your differences. But also we need to remember that it's not just a nice thing to do. And it's coming back to that rights-based perspective again. Everybody has the right to work. Everybody has the right to free choice of employment, to just and favourable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. And honestly, sometimes whenever you're disabled, it feels like this doesn't apply to you. It feels like everybody else gets this opportunity and you don't. And the only barrier between you getting them and not getting them is the employment space changing and progressing and, you know, keeping up to date with the world and realizing that, you know, we actually need different minds. We need different ways of working, different perceptions and people who think outside the box. And that's not something we only need to accommodate. It's something that's going to massively contribute to the value and the strength of our workplace. So I'm going to leave it on that. I'm sorry if I went over time. I do tend to do that now and again. I am not sure if there's time for questions or anything, but I'm going to hand back over to Christabelle. If that's all right. And thank you so much for inviting me along. I really enjoyed addressing all of you today.
Thanks so much, Fiona. That was a brilliant presentation and really practical as well. I think for anybody who's on this call or this webinar today, the takeaway really from what you've highlighted is that there are so many things as employers that we can all do in terms of accommodations and at that interview stage, that it isn't just about providing those accommodations. And indeed under the legislation, it isn't just about providing accommodations at employment stage, but actually access to it, which would include the interview process. And putting ourselves in other people's shoes as well. There can sometimes be a fear from employers that a lot of these accommodations have a huge cost, but we know that even in, I think it was 2019, AHEAD did some research and found that 2/3 of accommodations requested actually had no cost at all. And even when you were talking about them there today, so many of these things are very small changes, but they have a huge impact on the individual who's applying for work or who's in employment and living with a disability. Thanks so much, Fiona, for taking the time today. I know that you're so busy at the moment, yourself and everybody in AsIam. You're all doing fantastic work, and it's really wonderful seeing yourself and Adam Harris so frequently in the media and talking about such an important subject. We're going to have Voices of Experience with the Open Doors Initiative. That's going to be chaired by our CEO, Jeanne McDonagh. And she will be speaking to Nia Covell, who's the EDI lead in the IDA, and Michael Rosny. And Michael is a career coach, a TEDx speaker, and a triathlete. So that's going to be a really, really interesting conversational piece. So we'll see you back here at 11:15. Thanks so much.
Hi and welcome back. And I'm delighted in this section that we'll hear from employers and employees about their experience in working with disability and the benefits it brings. I'm really delighted to welcome Nia Covell, EDI lead from IDA, and Michael Rosny, who's a career coach, a TEDx speaker, and a triathlete, so putting me to shame. So without further ado, we'll kick off. Now I might turn to you. Firstly, can you tell us how the IDA's work in the disability space came about, please?
Thanks so much for having us, Jeanne, and we're so excited to be here, and I'm delighted to represent IDA. I feel like we've come so far in contributing to the space since EDI started in 2017 as an internal initiative. So I'd say from a want to do perspective, this has been something that has been on the table and the agenda for quite some time. It took about a year and a bit, I think, before we felt educated enough to even attempt to start to put a shape on what a work placement would look like. But we had extensive conversations with the EDI team. And what we really wanted to do was to be able to give someone the opportunity to get their foot in the door. You know yourself, for recruitment and interview panels and things like that, it's really difficult for people to get through that shortlisting process sometimes. And we have to do something. IDA creates jobs. We want to help create jobs for people who just can't seem to get through the process, but are the best people for the jobs. And so with that, we just kept going back to, we need to give somebody that foot in the door. And we all talked about, we've had our own experiences. I remember when I got my foot in the door for a corporate job, and it was life-changing. And the research shows that it makes lives better. You have things that you're contributing to. So eventually, and ODI was very much a huge contributor in helping us put enough shape on what a work placement would look like and how we actually get that off the ground.
Great. And what barriers were there and how did you overcome them?
I feel like initially we were like, yeah, this will be straightforward. We're just going to put up the job spec and off we go. And then I think once we started to actually make progress, instead of pushing ahead, it felt more like fumbling ahead, and a million different phone calls going, Jeanne, I thought we had this cracked and now we definitely don't. So we can't thank you guys enough for the support there. But even with us being nervous and unsure, we had the intent there that we wanted to do something. So we took a rethink of how we were advertising, the wording that we were using, the recruitment process, who would be on the interview panel. And I will say, in fairness, sometimes it does get a bit overwhelming because there's so much to take into account. So we eventually took a step back just to see what the next easiest step would be and give ourselves a bit of perspective. So we tried to make the process very manageable, with little bite-sized bits that we could tick off slowly but surely. So we asked managers to come forward, get some internal buy-in, say who would be interested in housing a work placement for someone from an underrepresented group. And we had people come forward. We asked them to craft the job spec because, while I know what I do in my day-to-day, to say I know what an ops division or a non-ops division gets up to in their daily work, I have no idea. So the manager who was selected was extremely helpful in putting together something that was straightforward, easily accessible, plain English, and off we went. So from there, we utilized ODI to help us prep the managers for recruitment, the buddy who would be in place for the person to just have chats to. We do unconscious bias training for interview panels anyway, but it was additional. If someone is neurodiverse coming in, how can you make them feel more welcome? If somebody has a reasonable accommodation, what's an easy way to put that in place for HR? So it was just kind of practical things that we could do to make the whole process seem smaller and less intimidating, because you don't want to get someone in the room and you're off, you're ready for the interview panel, and they feel like they're too small to fill the screen. And that's the last thing that we want. So we try to make it as welcoming as possible. Something that we haven't done before that we did do for this competition was we provided the questions beforehand to all candidates. So everybody coming in had the same time frame, the same opportunity to prepare. And it just seemed to go really well. We felt more prepped going into the room, and it was a very positive experience all around. And I think that we had so much prep going into it. We felt very prepared, but we're always not as prepared as we want to be. So I think you just have to kind of jump into it at a certain stage, and then make corrections, hear feedback from team members, and then adjust and keep going. If you've done something to offend or a misstep, you stick up your hand and go, so sorry, won't happen again. Here's what we're going to do to correct that, and keep moving.
And just on that, what learnings would you have to share with other employers who are thinking about going down this pathway and want to do it inclusively and correctly? And what hints would you give them, tips?
You're never going to be ready enough. I like to be very prepared, and I would say that while I'm not very patient typically, and I like to get stuff done. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna prepare, and I'm gonna get it done. It's gonna be perfect. And that's not how life works. So you kind of have to just go, I'm never going to be ready enough. I'm never going to be educated enough, because it's such a changing landscape. And internally, we're doing a lot of conversations right now around the language of disability. Is it a person with disabilities? Is it a disabled person? What's the stuff we don't say anymore? And there's such a fear there that nobody wants to misstep. So what ends up happening is that nobody says anything. And you're sitting there going, well, we have to talk about it. And they're going, I don't know how to talk about it. So you just have to start and find manageable bite-sized steps. Alone, NIA cannot decrease the unemployment numbers for underrepresented individuals. What I can do is contribute into a workplace where we actively ensure those individuals are in the pipeline, and that we have an accessible process, and we have a reputation that if somebody says, I need an accommodation here, yeah, absolutely, no problem. There's a huge fear factor, and understandably so. If I stick my hand up for an accommodation, I'm going to get flagged that I have a disability and I'll never be promoted again. And we as the employer have to keep working to make sure people know the ever-changing landscape of my hair color, which, if for anybody that works in IDA, my hair changes quite frequently. Someone with a disability, their needs, it should be as common as, oh, now I went and got her hair done. Oh, you need an accommodation. Yeah, no problem. It shouldn't be this big thing, but we understand why it is. So we just jumped into it, and we take feedback from team members. Because we're continually working in this space and trying to have very transparent, authentic conversations. It's, look, we have this idea, we want to do this thing. What do you think? And in fairness to all of our team members in IDA, they're very vocal. So they're happy to come back to go, no, and here's the reasons why I don't think it'll work. Or, I really like that idea, but I'm definitely not comfortable with X, Y, and Z. And then as the persons who are trying to get the initiative across the line, it's up to us. I can't tell a person with autism what they need for the job, because I don't have autism. So I need to take a cue from them and adjust accordingly. And I think that constant feedback, that constant iteration loop, it's not one and done. It's not a tick the box. It's a consistent, we're doing this again, we're doing this again, we're reinventing it again to make it the best that it can be. And it's going to be different for everybody. And then it goes into, oh my God, this is too much, we're never going to solve it. I can't solve it for everybody. But what I can commit to is that we as an organization have started, and we can point to, I've made a difference for this person, I've made a difference for this person. And the goal is to grow it wider, so we're making differences for many persons, but I have to start somewhere, and I can't change the world. So it's bit by bit, it's listening to people who are in the space that have the feedback, it's finding best practice, it's dedicating someone to going and making it happen. And you're never going to be ready enough. You're never going to be prepared enough. Something will come up. And I think one of the things we've really narrowed in on is that because equality, diversity, and inclusion is such a large space, what I tell people is, you as a 18, 19-year-old coming into the workforce, what would have made a difference for you? What would have opened the door sooner for you? for people who, their kids, their nieces and nephews, their brothers and sisters who maybe identify in the space. What experience do you not want them to have? What would make it better for them? And at least it kind of, when it does change, when it does get frustrating, when there is a setback, you can kind of revert back to, here's the intent behind what we're doing. I want 14-year-old Naya, who walked in for her first interview, to be a little more okay. I want to have a little bit better of an experience than I did. And that just kind of waterfalls. And when people see that, they jump on board. They're excited to, yeah, I want to do that. I hated this experience that I had when I was younger. I want to do that too. So it helps people realize it's a very practical thing we're doing in the job creation.
And just a final question before I turn to Michael. What benefits were there to IDA in hiring people with disabilities? How has that changed the landscape in IDA?
It's always changing. It's always changing. And I think there's so many different answers I think I could give, but what I really narrowed it down on in prepping for today was that diversity in and of itself does not ensure change. It just ensures that you have different people on the payroll. What we always strive for is inclusion. And as people with different experiences, as persons with disabilities come into the organization, they bring such a different perspective. So me walking into the canteen for something, I have my set experience there. But when you sit down and you have an open conversation to say, tell me what it's like when you go into the canteen, the wide range of just, oh, I never thought of it that way. Or we're looking to do an initiative, we have our annual conference coming up and it's going to be virtual again. And so we're trying, okay, now how can we make this fun and accessible? And you talk to somebody with a different experience and they go, well, what if we did this? Well, what if we did it that way? Oh, I know, I really liked when. And you go, I never would have thought of that. I've never been in their shoes, so how could I? And it brings all of these voices together, and whatever initiative you have, it elevates it. So you're not just doing something that's like, oh, that's nice. You're coming away with these things and you're going, this is going to be amazing. So it's not just the diversity hire, it's incorporating diverse people and diverse perspectives. And sometimes you don't want to hear it. Sometimes it's not positive, but you have to take it on the chin and go, we didn't do the best. We didn't do it as well as we could have or should have or wanted to. So how do we do it better next time? What's the one thing we can change to make a difference for the next person coming in? And it can be a very humbling experience. It can be some things that have happened ages ago that, I wasn't here when that happened. I'm so sorry that happened to you, but how do I stop it from happening to the next person or from happening to that person again? So it's a very humbling way. It's a very fun way. It's a very interesting way to really elevate how you're delivering the product. Like I'm part of the HR and OD team with the EDI title, I suppose. And you're always finding new ways to reinvent how you're engaging team members. And that's vital, so it's the voices, and it's really listening to what people say, not just ticking the box that, oh, we hired someone who is a wheelchair user. Fantastic. Have you asked them what their onboarding experience is like and how they're integrating in? And when they say not well, what are we doing to then give someone the ability to integrate further, to get that culture piece in there so they feel like they belong and that they're valued? Because if they don't feel valued, they'll go somewhere else and they'll give those amazing contributions. They'll give those disruptive technology innovations to someone else. And we want to be able, like, from a selfish employer perspective, I want us to be known as shifters and movers and shakers in these spaces. I don't want someone else to do it. I want us to do it because we're cool. And who else can we get involved in the process? So it's our biggest benefit is having the new voices come in, having existing voices come forward to say, I identify in the space and I haven't been comfortable to tell anybody. Most disabilities are unseen. So we don't know unless someone comes up and says, hey, I identify in this space. So let's make it a culture where that's as easily talk aboutable, for my proper English. It's we can talk about it. It's not a taboo subject, and it means that you bring a completely different perspective from anybody else. And we're so excited, good, bad, ugly, brave, terrifying, to incorporate that in and take the easiest next step to make a positive change in the workplace.
Thank you. And thank you for your enthusiasm in the work. It's amazing. It's brilliant.
It's exciting. It's fun.
It is. Michael, I'll turn to you now. You've had a big year. Can you tell us something about it?
Yeah, it's been an interesting one, all right. So I work as a job coach, but found out on the 5th of January, my first day of work this year, that my job was gone. And we had just verified it in December that all was good for the contract for 2021. And so what I'd done is I had gone and paid for a college course, got myself a lovely new laptop. So I was like under pressure financially. And also I just felt like a total fake because I was the cobbler with no shoes, like the job coach with no job. And that was actually probably my biggest obstacle to work, was not getting into a spin in my own head about what this means about me. So so for start of the year, job went. Then the college course was a stretch for me, and I knew it was going to be a stretch for me. I've avoided going to college since I finished school because I always found it very difficult to concentrate in a class setting. But I've always been bright, so it's been a sort of a double-edged thing, that there's a frustration, the fact that I couldn't seem to engage with mainstream education. So doing the course, I had this real breakthrough moment in the middle of it where we had these 2 books to get through, and they just sat there gathering dust, becoming more and more intimidating. And I eventually said, I'm going to read a chapter out loud and record it on my phone. I know that reading it out loud, I might engage with 5% of the content. I'll take some of it in, but then if I go for a walk and play it on my headphones, that I'll take it in. And what I didn't realize that I was doing was that I was adapting to this learning environment that didn't suit me, because I love audiobooks and I do actually love reading, but I'm just out of the habit of doing it. And I've realized that audiobooks are more efficient for me because I can walk and read at the same time. So I didn't realize that I was adapting, but the journey of doing the course, it was really emotional because it brought up exactly how I felt in school. Again, this frustration at being bright, at getting all the concepts, but not being able to, I suppose, just not being able to concentrate. And then what happened was, so thankfully, I'm good at just going out and talking to employers. So we call that employer engagement. And I've realized that that's a great way to help people get jobs. And that's something I'd love to talk about a bit more today, if possible, is just literally just going and having conversations with people who have jobs and employers. So anyway, I was taken on to do a short project of just going out and meeting loads of employers, finding out what their needs were. Could we help them with training, with the view to getting people jobs? And I was sort of shocked because the employers were telling me, up till now, I'd been working exclusively with job hunters, and the employers and the job hunters were like, oh, I can't find a job. And then suddenly the employers are going, we can't find people. We just can't get someone good to do this job. And I'm going, there's a translation process that needs to happen here between employers and job hunters. So anyway, I went, found a new role, thank God. And then a colleague in my new role talked about having ADHD, which, I mean, I just didn't really know anything about. All I thought was that this is someone who gets distracted. That was literally what, my very limited understanding of it. So she described a little bit about what that was like for her. And I was the penny was dropping slowly that I tick a lot of these boxes. And then another, someone in my family was given a diagnosis as well of the same thing. So when I diagnosed, and I still have to go through the process of having that formalized, but I've taken ownership of what that means for me. I'm in recovery, addiction recovery also. So I don't particularly want to be prescribed meds for it, because I know that those meds are fairly appealing for people like me. So the last thing I want to do is dabble with them if I don't need to. But I've just been on a journey of now starting to understand why, like, if it's a busy office environment, I can't really be there. So I've adapted my career without knowing why I was adapting it. So I've done like sales work, or in the job coaching work, sometimes you can go and meet people in the community or go knocking on employers' doors. And if I can do that 1 or 2 days a week, I can endure the office for a day or two. Or if I can work from home a day or two and get out a little bit, that works for me. So I'm slowly but surely realizing that my life, my work life, everything has been an adaptation to this way that I think, which isn't actually me being distracted by external things all that much at all. It's about me being distracted by my thoughts, which I run at 100 miles an hour 24/7. So yeah, so it's kind of early days learning what this means for me.
And you've talked about some of the barriers you faced. And can you talk in more general about the barriers for people with disabilities, and how do you suggest they overcome them? You've talked about some of the ways you cope with it as well, in particular, but in general, what are the barriers and how can they be overcome in terms of employment?
Yeah, so like, just to give context in that, I've job coached specifically in this space. So it's people who with some kind of a diagnosis or some kind of a disability only. And then I worked mainstream privately, and different types of coaching work, and all, employment related. The biggest obstacle is internal. Like, the biggest obstacle for me this year could have been to go, I am scared. I just need to stop for a minute here and not apply to anything because of the fear. I've 2 small kids, and as I said, I just run up a little bit of debt, which I thought was really conscious debt at the time. So I just didn't have that choice, thank God, in January this year myself. But I think that the biggest obstacle is people not actually putting themselves out there. And that goes across the board. So like, I spoke to a senior HR manager in pharma recently, and she talked about people who she described as steady eddies, who sit in the corner, do their work every day, and they don't like put themselves forward for anything. They don't say, hey, listen, I've just completed this project, it's great, look at it, whereas I'm extroverted naturally and like to tell people about the stuff that I'm great at. So I don't know if that makes me a terrible person, but it's useful for job hunting to just be good at putting yourself forward. And so I think the like that across the board is that people can just lack the confidence to go forward. And something that Naya said there, you're never going to be ready enough. That's totally applicable to job hunters as well. I'm never going to be delighted about this call just starting or an interview just starting. I'm always going to be like, oh no, like, this is the last thing I want to be doing. Can it beam me up, get me out of here. So I think obstacles. So I would say number one is people not putting themselves out there. Why do people not put themselves out there? And I'd say just a vision is one thing like that. It's very hard to, when someone like me comes along and says, oh, so what work would you love to do? It's very hard for someone who's straight out of school or college and they've never actually seen a workplace. They've never seen someone do the kind of role that they'd love, I watch, I'm sure like lots of people watch Jamie Oliver cooking on TV. And that guy was just born to cook. Like, he loves every moment of it. He loves every little vegetable. He's holding it like, a baby. And I think, I do fundamentally believe that we all have work that we're born to do, like work that really makes us feel alive. And when I find a project like that, so I'm one of those people that don't actually, I don't know if this is something to do with the ADHD thing or it's just me as a person, but there are times when I'll be very extroverted and put myself out there, and there's other times where I just want to hide. So like, I think it takes huge courage if you haven't seen a workplace to start putting yourself out there and asking for an opportunity. So like the way I would look at it is I'm trying to meet as many people as I can who have jobs or who employ people. And most employers are tiny micro employers, right? So it's really easy to go and have a chat with your local, whoever cuts your hair. Because whoever cuts your hair is really well networked. They know hundreds and hundreds of people, and they will know someone. They'll be chopping someone's hair and they'll be going, I cannot get someone to make coffee here. I can't get someone to sell in my sales team, whatever it is. So like sometimes the opportunities are right there in front of us. But so I'm trying to talk to the guy who cuts my hair. When I go into a garage to put petrol into my car, I will literally ask, hey, what's this? If it's quiet, like I'll say, well, what's this place like to work for, you know? And who's the boss? Is there a good time to catch the boss? And that's what I mean about employer engagement. That's just having a conversation with someone with a job or with an employer to find out. And this is my ultimate goal, right? This is like the secret weapon of job hunting, is I want to find out where their pain is. So if an employer is like, I cannot meet you for the next 3 weeks, I'm so busy, then I'm trying to quickly and respectfully ask them, what's the one role that would give you much more headspace? You know what I mean? So I know that employer's problem, if they're too busy, that they need an assistant or they need someone to help them with the accounts that they hate doing anyway. So it takes courage to do that. Like this year, I started doing it on LinkedIn, which I heard someone describe as the North Korea of social media, but it's actually a fabulous platform. And so that is, LinkedIn is where like young job hunters who I meet tend to go to TikTok on social media. Employers that I meet go to LinkedIn on social media. So my job as a job hunter is to go to where they live, not ask them to come to me because I'm the one, you know, looking for something. So I want to go to where they live, which is LinkedIn, and try and find out what their problems are. So again, like if I'm in any shop or garage or situation with a big queue in it, when I get to the top of the queue, I'll do my transaction as quick as I can and say, are you understaffed? And they go, yeah, we can't get anyone or whatever. And I go, perfect. This is someone who's hiring right now. And I know that if someone pops in there with a shirt and tie on with their CV and goes, look, I think I can help you. I can actually start today or I can start tomorrow. They've got a great chance because they're focusing exclusively on the needs of the employer. And so what I've been doing for years without knowing it is I've been making adaptations to the workplace. Then when I find a role, I've been going in and saying, hey, is there any way I can do an extra day selling? Because I love being on the road. I love meeting employers, finding out their problems and then matchmaking with them with people. But the reason why I was doing that is because I can't handle an office more than 2 or 3 days a week. I really struggle. It's easier post-COVID because offices are quieter, but I just get so distracted by noise. Like I can't focus. So I guess what I have been doing for my whole career is we're just bringing these adaptations into the workplace and going, I said, okay, if I wear these headphones because, I'm much more efficient when I do it. And I think that is a way that I think disclosing is a really big conversation. It's a really big decision and there's loads of pros and cons and it should be done in a collaborative way, if possible, with people who've already disclosed the same issue and who know what it means specifically to me. But I've lost my train of thought, Jeanne.
Not at all. No, it's a tsunami of information, which is all very, very on point. So don't worry about that. Just in light of what you're saying, is there any particular advice you give to people with disabilities who are looking to enter the workforce? It's what you do. So is there any sort of straight up, have you considered this? Have you considered that? Disclosure is one part of it.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, and it's so cliched that might sound like trite, but you got to find something that you're really genuinely interested in. And when you're genuinely interested in something, that is going to come across. Like there are things, I'm trying to find an example, like when it comes to my kids, right? I love my kids more than anything in the world. I'm not going to be shy, no matter what a bad day I'm having or whatever. If something happens and one of my kids is in jeopardy, I will find my voice and I will do something and take action if I need to do something for my kids. And it's similar in the workplace that if like that, if I find myself organically talking to someone who's also passionate about cooking, who's passionate about sea swimming like I am, it's not a hard work conversation. It's an easy conversation. So like, if you can talk to people who are like you, who are passionate about the same things that you are, then the limitations kind of fall away a little bit, because you're peas in a pod. You're of the same tribe. You're talking about the same thing. So there are people who swim in the sea like me. I swim in the sea because when I get into the freezing cold sea, it shuts my mind down. My body just goes, oh my God, we need to survive this. And all my thoughts just disappear. So when I come out, it's like bliss. I have this beautiful peace of mind, which, I didn't realize. Again, that was where addiction stuff came from, was that I was trying to quieten my mind and I didn't realize that I was self-medicating. So what am I trying to say? When I get out of the sea, those people are my people. They understand on some level. They might not all have an ADHD diagnosis, but that's the best part of their day. And the barriers are broken down with them. They're not behind a desk wearing their suit going, will I take a risk on this guy or not? They're going, oh, that's Michael, the sea swimmer. And so like, if we can find things that we've got in common with people, and if we can find work that we're really passionate about, like a problem that, like, that girl Greta Thunberg, that's so passionate about the environment that at the age of whatever she is, she's willing to go on TV and do all sorts of things. That's because she's so committed to it. And so yeah, starting the conversations, trying to be honest with yourself about what are the things you're most passionate about. And one way of getting there is going the opposite. Go, what's the kind of work that I could just never do? So for me, I think of accountants, and I'm like, I just don't know how people do that. I couldn't. It makes me feel sick, like, thinking about it. And that's not. But I know people who are like, give me a big bucket of receipts and a coffee, and I'll come back 3 hours later and I'll tell you about your business. And I'm like, I don't get that, but I'm so glad there are people who love that, because I don't have to do it then. You know what I mean? And that is, I think that when you think about the marketplace, right? Because that's what the job hunting is. We're just trading. It's a trade of our time for money. So like, picture someone who is going to go, oh, Michael, you're exactly the guy we needed. We just need someone to do exactly what you've just described. And that's what a good salesperson will do, is that they will go, Jeanne, if you buy my product, your life is going to get better, and they will genuinely believe it. And that's what, like, job hunting is sales and marketing. It's a combination of those two things. So if you're committed to getting a job, you have a sales and marketing role. And so I'd look at what great sales and marketing people do. They dress fabulously and they meet people. Like, Jeanne, one of your colleagues sent me an invitation to this last night, and I immediately added her on LinkedIn. I didn't really think twice about it, but I kind of am collecting people the whole time from my LinkedIn network, just so that to start new conversations with people and find out what's going on in open doors, what's going on in the IDA, and like all those things. To me, adding someone on LinkedIn who I don't know takes like a tiny bit of courage. You know what I mean? It might be a tiny bit uncomfortable. What if this person rejects me? But if I do it 10 times a day, then it just becomes my normal. And the same thing with job interviews. If I'm doing 5 job interviews, the first job interview is always going to be scary, but 5 job interviews and it starts to get a little bit easier. So
right. No, I mean, that's great. And just some takeaways from that is have conversations, build confidence, and find commonality. And I think that works for all of us on all aspects of our work journey and our life journey and all of those things. I just realized we're running straight up against time. It's been a brilliant conversation. Thank you both so much. It's lovely to have you both, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insights. It's been really enlightening.
Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us for the final session of our day today. My name's Claire Hayes and I'm a white female. I have short blonde hair, I'm wearing glasses and I have blue eyes, and I'm wearing a dark top with green little flowers on them, and I'm in front of a white background with teal and purple colours. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for being with us today, and for those who joined this morning and have been staying with us. It's really great to see you on the call. I'm the coordinator of Towards Work, a project of the Open Doors Initiative. Towards Work is a person-focused initiative that exists to support any individual who has a disability on their journey toward employment, self-employment, or further education. We facilitate free online training sessions, as well as providing practical toolkits and information. Since launching in September, we've engaged with many participants and supported them on their journeys towards employment, self-employment, and further education. We're absolutely delighted to be funding the Self-Employment for People with Disabilities course in TU Dublin, the first of its kind. If you'd like further information on the courses that we're running, please do visit our website at towardswork.ie to register for training, or you can email us at info@towardswork.ie if you have any specific questions that we can help with. As well as practical training, we've developed a mentorship program in partnership with the Open Doors Initiative. We have mentors signed up from across a number of sectors who are willing to help and support individuals on their journey. Next Wednesday at 10 a.m, we are running Mentee Training. If you feel this is something that would be of benefit to you or somebody you know in your life, please do sign up and take part. We've heard from some really great speakers today already, and they've shared a lot of their insights and experiences. So we're moving on to our final session. This afternoon, we have another fantastic set of speakers from the Department of Social Protection who have an extensive amount of knowledge and information to share. This session will be focused on supports and grants that are available to employees who have a disability and their employers. We will have Tracy Smith, who will be speaking to us about the supports available at your local NTO office, followed by Anne-Marie Gavin, who will cover disability-related income supports. And finally, Dermot Crosby will be discussing additional employment supports available to people with disabilities, as well as financial supports available to their employers. If you do have any questions throughout the session, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be able to host these questions at the end with our three speakers. If we don't, we will do our very best to answer everybody's questions. However, if we don't, we will try to follow up with you after the event ends. And just to note that all of our slides will be shared following the event. So I'd like to welcome Tracy to come on screen now, and she can share her presentation and we can get this last session started off.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for having me on this session. My name is Tracy Smith. I'm an employer relations officer, and I am a female with shoulder length dark hair and a fringe, and I have blue eyes, and I am wearing a black dress that has some red and tan stripes on it. And my background is basically white. So I'm going to go through today. The agenda for my session is to talk about Intrio and us being the public employment service. I'm going to talk about jobsireland.ie, which is our recruitment website. I'm also going to talk about some employer relations supports, and mainly I'm going to talk about the supports that are there for job seekers, the Back to Work Enterprise Allowance, the Back to Education Allowance, the Training Support Grant, and the Work Placement Experience Programme. And I'm going to talk very briefly about online courses and further education and training. So first up, Intrio, what are we? Well, we're the Public Employment Service, which means that we're a single point of contact for all, offering practical employment services and supports for job seekers and employers. And your local Intrio can support you to prepare for and find work, to identify suitable training opportunities and supports for setting up your own business. You can avail of a case officer who will work with you one-to-one with drawing up a personal progression plan, which is basically a document that will identify what support you need to get you into the workforce. Is it CV help, or looking at training opportunities, or just getting you linked up with employers who are actively looking to hire people? So jobsireland.ie, it's a free, easy to use online recruitment service for both employers and job seekers. So just to say, within my document, which you will get, my presentation that you will get afterwards, all these links that are underlined, they're hyperlinks that you can click on that'll give you further information. And there is lots of information about Jobs Ireland and what it can do in terms of matching you with employment, job searching, sorting out CV templates, giving you advice, and also with detailing what training is available for you. There's instructional videos in case you're not sure how to navigate the site. The employer services, so there's dedicated teams nationally and locally, and they help employers by advertising and promoting vacancies for free on their recruitment platform, Jobs Ireland, and through a range of other networks. So in addition to that, vacancies can be posted across the EU through our EURES service, so EURES standing for the European Employment Service. There's financial incentives that are available to employers to support recruitment. And there's a booklet that's great for both employers and job seekers in terms of knowing what an employer can get for recruiting you from the department. So there's lots of webinars and online recruitment events held constantly throughout the year. And it's just all about encouraging participation in work experience and in work. And there's absolutely no cost for all this for the employer. So straight up, the Back to Work Enterprise Allowance, or BTWEA, as we would call it in-house. So basically, it's a scheme to help people who are thinking of starting a new business. And you can qualify if you're receiving disability allowance, blind pension, or invalidity pension for at least 9 months. Now, there are other qualifying payments that I haven't listed here, but again, that link there is clickable and you can get full information on how to qualify through it. But if you're getting one of those payments for at least 9 months, you can retain 100% of that payment for the first year of your business, and then 75% of that payment for the second year. And hopefully then in the third year, you have a fully established business, fully viable, and you can come off your social welfare payment then. So what else can you get? Well, you get support from a case officer and an enterprise officer while you're on the Back to Work Enterprise Allowance. You can get your free travel for 5 years. You can retain your household benefit. The potential to retain your medical card, that would depend on the means that you're gaining from the self-employment, and the HSE would determine that. And you can avail of the enterprise support grant, which is €2,500, for various things that you would need to establish the business. And there's more details on that link there. How do you apply for this? You contact your local intro centre and you request your nearest Back to Work Enterprise Allowance case officer. So they'll contact you and conduct a brief initial assessment for your suitability. And after that, you'd be referred to the local development company, and they will assist you in discussing your options, exploring the viability of your business idea and helping you prepare your business plan. They'll complete the application form, which will come back to the case officer in the intro centre and will be submitted for decision. So don't start anything until you get written approval from the department. So then the Back to Education Allowance, or BTEA, as we call it in-house. So you'd have to be in receipt of disability allowance, blind pension, invalidity pension, or illness benefit. And again, that's not detailed, and there are other payments that you can be on to qualify, and full listing of all that is on that link there. So if you're attending a second level course, you must be in receipt of your payment for 3 months or more, or for a third level, you must be in the receipt of the payment for 9 months or more. To qualify, the rate of payment is the same as your current rate of payment. That's what you will get paid. So whatever rate of payment you're on now on your disability allowance, you will get that while you're attending the course or school. So all the courses must lead to Quality and Qualifications Ireland, or QQI accreditation or equivalent, and you must progress in education qualifications. So for example, if you already have a level 6 on the National Framework of Qualifications, the course you attend must be at least a level 7 qualification. How do you apply? Through your local intro centre. Your eligibility for the scheme will then be assessed, and you can get the form from your local intro centre, but then you'd have to send the form off to the section that pays you. So if you're in receipt of blind pension, send it off to that section in Sligo, and the full details of each section and their address and how to contact them are there. So the Training Support Grant, what is it? We call it the TSG. So it's designed to fund quick access to short-term training. It's considered when a training need is identified, it cannot be provided by the department or any other state provider. So it's available when you display a need for a job, you have a job offer or a potential job offer, and there's a skill gap or a requirement to maintain or achieve accreditation. So for example, a Safe Pass. You got the job, you don't have the Safe Pass, the TSG can come in there and help you, identify or to eliminate that gap. So to qualify and apply, it's a case officer again. They can approve a grant. The maximum amount is €1,000 per year, and the funding is included up to and including level 6 on the National Framework of Qualifications. So the grant is paid directly to the training provider after the training has been completed. So next up, I'm talking about the Work Placement Experience Program. So it's a placement for training and work experience, supporting people to pivot their skills, upskill, and re-enter the workforce. What is it and how can I qualify? So it's a placement for 6 months and it's completely voluntary. You apply through jobsireland.ie. So if you go on to Jobs Ireland, you can select your county that you're interested in doing a placement in and select the Work Placement Experience Program, and all available programs will come up there. You apply directly through that. So you work for 30 hours a week for 26 weeks and you have a mentor within the business assigned to you. So there's a minimum of 60 hours training during the placement, of which 20 hours have to be sector recognised or accredited. So you leave with accreditation at the end of the programme. Participants have to be aged between 18 and 65, and you have to be in receipt of a qualifying payment for at least 6 months. So those payments are their job seekers allowance, benefit, one parent family payment, job seekers transition, disability allowance, or blind pension. So time spent on other payments will count towards eligibility. The minimum rate that you get paid is $306 per week. So you will get an increase in your payment. So if you're a disability allowance of $203 a week, you're going to go up to $306 per week. If you are getting payment for qualified adults and children, that will be added on. So you're getting at least the national minimum wage. And you will also get any underlying entitlements that you had prior to starting the placement. So if you were entitled to the fuel allowance before you started, you're still entitled to it. The Christmas bonus, whatever those underlying entitlements from the department you have, you'll keep them. So how does it work? How do you apply? Well, the employers have to put up the placements on Jobs Ireland, and that's validated by the Jobs Ireland team. So participants, job seekers, register with Jobs Ireland and apply directly through there. And when you're selected, an application form is completed with you and the host, and that's sent off to our head office, the work placement unit. The application is processed by them to check your eligibility and either confirm or decline the application. So the host and the participant need to wait to hear confirmation before starting anything. So the benefits for you as a participant, well, you're going to get training and a quality work experience. You're going to get accredited training. You're going to get an increase in your payment, workplace experience. There's going to be a mentor within the business assigned to you. You're going to get case officer support from the Department of Social Protection. You'll get your own personal learning journal to track your progress and learning. And throughout the placement, you're going to be invited to different webinars that will help with, varying topics like CV writing or assistance with digital learning. So hopefully at the end of it, you've been trained and that the employer would then hire you at the end of the 6 months. So what's the benefit for the host? Well, they're asked to provide a training plan for the participant, training support and mentoring, commitment to returning monitoring forms every month, and to engage with a case officer at 2 meetings. So in return, they can expect 6 months trainee who will work for 30 hours per week. They are going to save payroll of nearly €8,000 because they're not paying the participant, it's the department that is. They're going to get the opportunity to introduce mentoring to their business, to build productivity, and to access recruitment incentives for payroll savings, information on workforce learning options, and being part of the National Economic Recovery Plan. So just briefly on blended learning and online courses. So it's available for job seekers who wish to avail of training remotely. while in receipt of their payment. There's a large number of courses free to job seekers when you're referred by a case officer. The course must assist you in gaining employment. You have to continue to seek and be available for full-time employment unless agreed by the department. And due to COVID, these courses may qualify for back to education allowance, which again, you'd have to discuss with your case officer. So fetch courses, further education and training, they're available, again, free to job seekers on a Department of Social Protection payment who wish to progress to employment. Some of the part-time courses may involve a small fee. They're provided by the ETBs, the Education and Training Boards, remotely since COVID-19. And job seekers can apply directly on the Education and Training Board website. The case officer must refer you to ensure that your payment isn't affected. The course must provide progression to full-time employment, and you'll have regular meetings will still be held with your case officer during this training. So just this page is detailing basically everything I've spoken about today. Jobs Ireland, the booklet for the employers, the Back to Work Enterprise Allowance, Back to Education Allowance, the Work Placement Experience Programme, the Training Support Grant. And I've added that in the training by sector page, which is very handy. It's on Jobs Ireland and shows all the different training that you can avail of from a particular sector, and also how to contact your nearest case officer. So thank you so much for listening to me. And if you have any queries, you can always email us at employer@welfare.ie. I will be participating with a Q&A with my two colleagues, Anne-Marie and Dermot, when they have finished speaking, so we can take any questions that you have at that point. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tracy. That was a very informative piece. And I'd like to thank everyone involved today as well in giving us this platform to speak. My name is Anne-Marie Gavin, and I work in the Employer Relations Unit in the Department of Social Protection. I am a white woman with blonde hair and green eyes. I am wearing a dark navy dress, and I'm wearing glasses, and I have headphones on. I go by the pronouns she and her, and I have a plain beige background today. Today, I'm going to talk about disability-related income supports and employments from social protection. Now, this slide here is the agenda that I'm going to go through today. I'm just going to do a quick overview of, oh, beg your pardon, sorry about that. Then I'm going to give a quick overview of disability allowance and blind pension, but I'm also going to talk about what to do when starting work. I'm going to mention partial capacity benefit and a quick word on the benefit of work calculator. I'll also finish off with a video from Willing, Able and Mentoring. Okay, so as you are aware, the disability allowance is a means tested weekly payment where income is taken into consideration. To qualify, you must have an injury, disease or disability that has continued or may expect to continue for at least 1 year. And as a result of this, you're constrained from doing work that would otherwise be suitable for you. You may be entitled to other benefits such as living alone increase and the household benefits package. You also must be aged between 16 and 66 and be habitually resident in Ireland. The maximum personal rate of payment is 203, and from January 2022, the weekly personal rate will increase by €5, and there will be proportionate increases for any dependents. There will also be a change later in the year to the means band, which will benefit people receiving disability allowance at a reduced rate and bring the weekly means disregard in line with blind pension. Income disregards are due to increase next year as well, and I will talk more about income disregards in a moment. Blind pension is also a means tested payment and is paid to blind and visually impaired people. To qualify for the pension, you sorry, my slides keep skipping ahead. To qualify the pension, you must supply an eye test from an eye surgeon to verify your visual impairment, among other criteria. You may also benefit from other department benefits, such as living alone increase and household benefits. You must be aged 18 to 66 and habitually residing in Ireland. You might also qualify for the blind welfare allowance, and this is paid by the HSE. So you need to check that out with them. And you might also qualify for other Department of Social Protection payments, such as, for example, one-parent family or job seekers benefit, if you fit certain criteria. So what to do when you're starting work? If you're coming from disability allowance or blind person pension, you need to let the department know as soon as you start work. And just to say, Christabelle, I think you mentioned it earlier, that nearly 37% of adults with a disability are in paid employment at the moment, and that compares with 73% of the rest of the population. And the 2016 census indicated that for those with a visual impairment, it's only around 24%. So hopefully this is something that will change with more flexibility, remote working becoming the norm, and of course with the supports available from social protection. So the first thing you need to do is, once you secure employment, you must notify the department. It's better to do this as soon as possible. And you can do this by sending in a letter from yourself or from your employer detailing the nature of the job and the rate of pay. The department will let you know if you need to send, what other information you might need to send in as well. A means decision is then calculated, taking into account your new circumstances. Okay, this slide gives you details of how much you might receive. So the first 140 of weekly income from employment after normal deductions such as PRSI and pension contributions, they are disregarded for the purposes of the means assessment. 50% of weekly earnings between the 140 and 350 are then disregarded. Earnings from work over 350 are then fully assessed as income, and this is going to rise to 375 next year. Combined income of up to 427 is disregarded for the medical card, which is a significant increase since December 2018. It was only 120. So just to reiterate the earnings disregard, if you earn 140 a week, you can retain all of your payment or below. After 140, it is reduced €1 for every €2 earned, up to a maximum of 350. After 350, it's reduced euro for euro. Just a few points to note: if you are over the means, you may retain your free travel pass for 5 years. If unfortunately your work ceases for whatever reason and you wish to return to your payment, you'll be fast-tracked within 12 months. So it's within 12 months, if you wish to return to your payment, you'll be fast-tracked back on it. And the rule that work needs to be rehabilitative in nature has also been removed. So I've included addresses here and contact numbers for the payment areas contact, depending on which one you're on. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about partial capacity benefit. So partial capacity benefit is return to work support for those on illness benefit for a minimum of 6 months, or for those on invalidity pension. It is a payment from the department for those who cannot work to their full capacity but have received permission to work. Differences in length of time apply on partial capacity depending on your underlying payment. It lasts for a total of 2 years if you're coming from illness benefit, and that includes the time already spent on illness benefit. And it lasts for 3 years if you're coming from invalidity pension. You can earn any amount and work as many hours as you see fit. You can also work in a self-employment capacity while getting partial capacity benefit. But just to note that you can't start work until you received written approval from the department. The payment is made on medical assessment. The personal rate of payment is based on the department's medical assessment. Sorry, you will either be assessed as moderate. Sorry, my slides keep going ahead. You may be assessed as a moderate, severe, or profound. It's very important to be aware that if you're assessed as mild, you won't qualify for partial capacity benefit. Okay, and if you look at this slide, this includes charts that you can see the different various rates that apply, depending on your level of incapacity and the original payment that you're on. It ranges from moderate to profound, and if profound, you will receive full social welfare payments. Just to let you know, the amounts differ because the original payments amounts differ. And also to let you know that those rates are on top of any wages you get from employment. Okay, so you should apply for the partial capacity benefit before you start to look for work. Your payment may change when you go back to work, but it will not actually happen until you start work. To get an application form, you must contact the partial capacity benefits section directly. There are some details there with phone numbers and emails. This is because they're not currently available online. So you should provide all appropriate medical evidence with your application and send to this address. So the benefit of work calculator, this is a handy tool where you can estimate what your rate of payment may be. You click on whatever payment is relevant to you, and you provide details of your job, your family, your children, and so on. The tool is anonymous and it cannot be used to identify you. I've included a link here that you can go and have a look at the benefit of work calculator. Okay, I hope I signposted you in the right directions, but I just have included some website addresses here for disability allowance, for blind pension and partial capacity. Thanks everyone for your time. And I just want to play a video from Willing, Able and Mentoring just to close off the presentation. And thanks everyone for taking the time out today to attend this. Thank you.
The Willing, Able Mentoring Program, known as WAM, is a graduate internship program established by AHEAD in 2005. It aims to bring graduates with disabilities and employers together through paid and mentored work placements. The program has two main goals: to give graduates with disabilities paid work experience in a supportive environment, and to help employers disability-proof their recruitment and HR practices and gain experience of hiring employees with a disability, all backed by the knowledge and experience of the WAM team. Since the program began, we've placed hundreds of graduates with dozens of high-profile employers across the country. Placements or internships at WAM are fully paid and are typically for a period of 6 months. Employers work closely with WAM to provide ring-fenced positions at graduate level, which are then disability-proofed by the WAM team. All positions are advertised on WAMWorks, our online graduate database, and applications go directly to WAM before being passed on to the employer, along with any necessary interview accommodations the applicants may have requested. WAM offers support and training for both the employer and the graduate before and during the process. Graduates can avail of our Get Ahead workshops, which promote upskilling of job-seeking skills such as interview and CV writing techniques. For employers, WAM provides support and assistance prior to any interviews taking place by conducting interview disability awareness training or answering any queries an employer may have. When a graduate has been selected for a position, a member of the WAM team will carry out a needs assessment with them, which looks at the impact of their disability versus their work tasks and the job environment. Recommendations are then made to the employer based on this assessment as to what supports should be put in place, in line with employment equality legislation. WAM also requests that the company provides a volunteer mentor who will help the graduate to settle in and act as an additional layer of support for them during the placement. Full training is provided both face-to-face and through our online courses for the graduate, the mentor and the manager. And WAM continues to support all those involved throughout to ensure the placement runs as smoothly as possible. If you are a graduate with a disability seeking work or an employer interested in getting involved, visit ahead.ie/WAM for further information.
So thanks again, everyone, for attending today. And I would just like to pass you over now to my colleague, Gemma Crosby, who's going to talk about additional support.
Okay, thank you very much, Emery. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dermot Crosby. I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon to share this information with you. I'm a disability case officer with the Department of Social Protection, and I'm part of the Employer Relations Unit. I'm based in Cork City. Just to give you a little description of myself, I'm a white male. I've got black curly hair, and I'm sorry to say there's natural highlights appearing there at the moment in the form of grey hair. Today I'm wearing glasses, and I'm also wearing a headset with microphone. And what I'd like to do over the next few minutes is give you an overview of the various employment supports that are available to employers, to employees and job seekers with disabilities. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. So I'm just going to choose the right application here now, the PowerPoint. Here we go. So hopefully that's up on your screen there now at the moment. And just very briefly, I'll just tell you about my work. As I mentioned, I'm a disability case officer here in Cork City, and all the clients that I meet every day are job seekers with disabilities, and they're all at different stages. Some job seekers are just out of school, some are out of college, some have been made redundant. So they're all at different stages, and it's my job then to show them all the various options that are available. Many of them want to retrain, upskill, but again, ultimately find work. So as I say, what I'm going to do is I'll just go through the various employment supports that are available to employers, employees, and job seekers with disabilities. And I'm just going to move on the slide. Here we go. It's just a little bit slow. It'll stall there for a moment. And the first slide I'd like to start with today is the Department of Social Protection's Pathway to Work strategy. And this strategy just came into effect quite recently. This strategy is covering 2021 to 2025. And basically, this strategy has got a major focus on reducing and preventing long-term unemployment. It's backed by 83 commitments right across government, and it sets out to deliver 1.6 million engagement with job seekers each year between now and 2025. And it also wants to deliver 10,000 work opportunities as well between now and 2025. So I just wanted to include that and start with that first slide. Yeah, we're moving along nicely now. The second slide there is an important slide. It's just covering labour market responsibility. And the Department of Social Protection has responsibility for providing labour market supports and services for job seekers with disabilities. And it does this in two ways. First of all, by assisting a job seeker with a disability to find paid employment. Now, if that job seeker isn't job ready, then bringing them to the point where they are job ready through a training or employment program. Just moving on to the next slide, and the grants and supports that I'm going to talk to you about today come under the Reasonable Accommodation Fund. And just to cover them briefly in overview, first of all, I'm going to cover the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant. I'm going to cover the Job Interview Interpreter Grant, the Personal Reader Grant, the Employee Retention Grant, Disability Awareness Support Scheme, the Wage Subsidy Scheme, and then finally supported employment, also known as employability. So I'm going to go into those grants now in more minute detail. And the first grant on your screen there at the moment is the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant. And this particular grant, it provides funding to cover the cost of non-standard equipment for employees with a disability. And just to give you an example of that, if you've got an employee in the workplace and they've got a visual impairment, it covers the cost of, let's say, for example, large computer screens or maybe software that employee may require. To give you another example, one of the largest disability groups in education today is people with dyslexia, right through primary education, secondary education, and third level education. And when somebody with dyslexia moves into employment, if they require some software or any non-standard equipment to help them do their job, the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant will cover the cost of that equipment. The maximum grant is €6,350, and it's important to say that it's not a once-off payment either. If somebody applies for equipment in 2018 and they discover in 2020-21 they need a revamp or upgrade to their equipment, they can reapply for the grant. Okay. If the employee moves employment, then the equipment is the ownership of the equipment lies with the employee, and they can take the equipment with them. Okay. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And this is the Job Interview Interpreter Grant. Now, this grant is available to somebody who is deaf, hard of hearing, or somebody with a speech impairment who requires the assistance of an interpreter for job interview situations. So to give you a very practical example, somebody is deaf and they secure a job interview. They can apply for the job interview interpreter grant, or the JIG as we know it internally, to cover the cost of an interpreter to attend the job interview with them. And the good thing about this grant is that it can be used as often as is required until that person secures employment. And when they secure employment, they can apply for the grant again to cover the cost of an induction. So again, the interpreter will come into the workplace, cover health and safety regulations, and introduce the deaf or hard of hearing employee to work colleagues and so on. That's known as the JIG. And I'm just going to move on to the next slide. The next slide there is the personal reader grant. We know it as the PRG for short. A lot of these grants all have abbreviations. And this grant is available to somebody who is blind or visually impaired, who requires assistance with work-related reading. Now, in a 12-month period, up to 640 hours of reading can be funded through this grant. At the initial application stage, the employee will meet up with a case officer, and at that point, a certain number of hours will be agreed per week. And the personal reader is paid at the minimum wage. And as you may know, the minimum wage is going up to £10.50 on the 1st of January 2022. The employee in this instance will nominate their own personal reader. At the moment in Cork, we don't have anybody availing of this particular grant. And the reason for that is there's so much assistive technology available for blind and visually impaired people at the moment that it can be purchased through the Workplace Equipment Grant, the first grant that I referred to there. One of the questions that's often asked when I cover the personal reader grant is, can somebody with dyslexia apply for the personal reader grant? And the answer there is no. This grant is specifically for somebody blind or visually impaired, but for somebody with dyslexia, as I mentioned earlier, they can apply for the Workplace Equipment Grant for any additional supports that they may need. Just moving on to the next slide, and this is the Employee Retention Grant Scheme. This grant is available to somebody who acquires a disability and they may be in danger of losing their job. Now, there's funding available here in two parts, up to €15,000. The first part, €2,500, is available to provide a workplace assessment. So an occupational therapist will come into the workplace and carry out the workplace assessment. And then the rest of the funding, €12,500, is available in two ways. First of all, to put supports and accommodations in place to keep the employee in their current role. If that's not possible, then the funding can be used to have the person retrained so that they can take up another position in the same company. But the goal is to keep the employee at work. Okay, so that's the Employee Retention Grant. And we used that quite recently with an employee in Cork. She was working for 30 years and developed a deteriorating disability. And through the Employee Retention Grant, we were able to keep the employee in work for another 2 years. But unfortunately, at that point, the disability had deteriorated to a point where the person just had to leave on early retirement. So I'll just move on to the next slide. This is the DASS, the Disability Awareness Support Scheme. There's a lot of funding available through the DASS, and basically the funding is available to an employer to help them provide disability awareness training in the workplace. It's a very, very important grant, and it's really taken off well for us here in Cork. But to give you a practical example, if an employer wants to introduce disability awareness training in the workplace and just make their staff more aware of disability, they can apply for the Disability Awareness Support Scheme, and up to €20,000 is available in the first year, or up to 90% of the cost of the training. In the second and subsequent years, up to 80% of the cost of the training can be covered through this grant. But to give you a practical example of how it works, when a disability awareness trainer comes into the workplace, it gives the staff the opportunity to ask questions and to try and eliminate misconceptions about disability and people with disabilities to be productive employees. One of the questions that's often asked by the employers is, if I employ a person with a disability, is it going to affect my liability insurance? And the answer is no, absolutely not. If you employ somebody with a disability, it's exactly the same as a person without a disability. employers often ask as well, if I employ a person with a disability, are they going to have a high absenteeism? Again, nothing could be further from the truth, because in general, a person with a disability, they value work and they value getting up every day and going to work. And a person with a disability has a high attendance record. So by introducing disability workshops and disability awareness training in the workplace, it just helps to eliminate some of those misconceptions. And as I said, there's a lot of funding available. It's not just a once-off payment. An employer can apply for this year after year. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And we're moving on to the wage subsidy scheme. And I've got to tell you straight away, I actually love the wage subsidy scheme. There's a lot of people, a lot of job seekers with disabilities that are in work today because of the WSS. And the WSS is a financial support that's paid to employers to help them employ job seekers with disabilities. To qualify for the scheme, the job seeker must work at least 21 hours per week, and the subsidy cuts out at 39 hours. 39 hours is considered full-time work. Okay. The idea behind the subsidy is to make good any perceived productivity shortfall. So if you've got somebody in the workplace, for example, with Asperger's or autism, mental health difficulties, if there's any deficit due to their disability, the subsidy makes good any perceived productivity shortfall. Fiona Ferris spoke earlier, and her presentation was excellent. And she spoke about people with Asperger's, but we have a lot of people employed through the WSS with Asperger's. And in Cork, we've got a few people with Asperger's employed in accountancy settings, accountancy offices. And to be fair, they do a fantastic job. But because a person may have Asperger's, there's also deficits in other areas. The deficits may be with social skills or whatever it may be specific to that person. So because there's a deficit or a productivity shortfall, the WSS is there to make good any perceived productivity shortfall. The hourly subsidy is €6.30 per hour. And if an employer employs somebody full-time through the WSS, the maximum grant there is €12,776 per annum. The employee is subject to the same conditions of employment as everybody else in terms of PRSI, PAYE, annual leave, and so on. Now I'm just going to move on to the next slide, and we're still on the WSS, but this time there's a strand 2 or a bonus payment to the WSS. So if an employer employs 3 to 6 people on the WSS, they qualify then for a 10% bonus. If they employ 7 to 12 or 7 to 11, they qualify for a 20% bonus. 12 to 16 employees, it goes to 30%. And when an employer employs 23 or more people through the WSS, they qualify for a 50% bonus. And we do have employers right throughout the country. And to give an example, if an employer has a retail outlet like Centra or SuperValue or Spar, an employer might have 2, 3, 4, 5 retail outlets, and it may not be possible for them to employ 3 people on the wage subsidy scheme in one retail outlet, but it could be quite possible for them to employ 2 or 3 in each outlet. And by doing so, they then qualify for strand 2 of the WSS, which enables them to qualify for the additional funding. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And again, we're on the wage subsidy scheme. And it's for employers that employ 25 employees through the WSS. And when they reach 25 employees, they then qualify for a payment of €30,000. And that €30,000 is there to employ an employment assistance officer. And the role of this employment assistance officer is just to support the employees that are employed there already through the WSS. Okay, the WSS really is a fantastic scheme. In Cork City, we have 300 people plus employed through the WSS. Nationwide, there's approximately 3,000 people. Many of those people may not be employed if it wasn't for WSS. In many cases, it goes on indefinitely, but it is reviewed every year. And when we go out to review the WSS, we never go out to remove the WSS from an employer, but we're also audited every year. So when we go to an employer, we have to show that we've been there, we've met with the employer, the employee, and we have to justify that there's still a need for the WSS. Because some people will start on WSS, they may be recovering from an injury or an illness, and they may need it for a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, and that's fine. Once there's a deficit or a shortfall there, we're quite happy to support the employer with the WSS. But as I say, after maybe 2 or 3 years, on a review, if there's no longer a deficit, the employee might be up to full productivity, and at that point the WSS may be removed, but not without consultation with the employer and the employee and without justification for it. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And this slide really is just a reminder for you all, because Anne-Marie covered this earlier, and this is just the benefits for work estimator. So if you are in receipt of a disability payment and you're thinking of going back to work, you can go onto the link on the website and it will give you an idea of how much that you will be coming out with if you take up employment, given your circumstances with spouse and children and so on. So that link is just there as a reminder. The next slide on your screen is employability, and employability are a fantastic service. They really are. They're funded by the Department of Social Protection, and they provide job coach support to job seekers with disabilities. And as a case officer with the Department of Social Protection, when a job seeker with a disability comes into me, once they're job ready, I refer them to employability, and immediately employability will assign them with a job coach, and the job coach will then meet that job seeker each week and help them find a job, be it full-time or part-time. The job coaches are all familiar with all the various employment support grants that I've covered, such as the WSS, the Job Interview Interpreter Grant, the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant, and so on. They really are a fantastic service, and they're based right throughout the country. There's 24 different agencies. And all you have to do really is just look at the high numbers of job seekers with disabilities that they help to place in employment every year. When a client is referred to them, they have up to 18 months in order to find work. And if the job coach helps the job seeker find work in the first 6 months, for example, the job seeker will still be there in the background, you know, checking in with the employee once a week, whatever it might be required, before they fully let them loose, so to speak, working independently. But the employability service are always there in the background. Another way that the employers can use employability is if an employer had an issue with an employee and needed a job coach to come in and maybe mediate, the employability service will also cover that as well. So they're there at hand for the employers as well. And our job coaches in Cork have a lot of links with employers, and the employers contact them directly. And if the employer has vacancies for retail or transport, warehousing, you know, they can contact the employability service, and the employability service then will issue CVs for the relevant vacancies. The employers then can do the interviewing, and if WSS is required, the job coaches will complete the application process for the employer to make it a lot easier. And in fact, the vast majority of the WSS applications come in via the employability service, which makes the whole paperwork situation much easier for the employers. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And this is just a reminder to all employers and job seekers about Jobs Ireland. Jobs Ireland is a free service to employers and job seekers, and this is where employers can advertise their vacancies free of charge. They can contact them on 0818 111 112 or log on to the website, and the job seekers can do the same. They can log on to the website. They're there to view all the various part-time and full-time vacancies. So it's just to remind employers and job seekers about Jobs Ireland. And I'm just going to move on to the final slide, and it's just to give you a link to all the various employment supports and schemes that I've covered and that Anne-Marie and Tracy have covered today as well. So it's available there from the gov.ie website. Now, I had a little bit of feedback through my headphones there, so I hope that came across okay there for you today. I know that we're going to break out into a questions and answer session now. So if anybody's got any questions, they can feed them into the chat box. And I'd like to thank you again for tuning in and for the opportunity to share this information with you this afternoon. Thank you all very much indeed.
Hi, yeah, thanks for that. We're just going to have a few questions that have come in now, and I'll just pass them over to the relevant colleagues. So I have a question here. Do employers have to disclose if they have an employee with a disability in order to receive the Disability Awareness Training Scheme grant? That's for you, Jeanne. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
I'll take that one there, Emery. To that employer, it's actually part of the application form. So on the application form, it says, you know, are you an employer who employs a person with a disability? Yes or no. No, it's not an absolute requirement that you must have a person with a disability employed, but the question is on the application form. But so if you didn't have anybody with disabilities employed, you could still apply for disability awareness training.
That's great, thanks. I have another question there for you, Tracy. Can participants work additional hours over the 30 hours and be paid extra by the employer if they're going on the WPEP scheme?
No, not by the employer that they're doing the placement for. They can only do the 30 hours. They cannot go over that. But what they can do is they can take up part-time employment with a different employer and earn money through that. And it does not affect the rate of payment that they're getting on the WPEP.
Oh, that's right. And to just have another one there for you, Tracy, when you're on, does time and illness benefit count towards the WPEP or the work placement?
No, time on illness benefit does not count towards the qualifying time for the WPEP.
Oh, okay, that's great, thanks. Dermot, I have another one there for you. It's actually a very good question. If an employee changes employment, if they have equipment purchased through the WEAG, can they take it with them?
Yes, indeed, they can, Emery. So just to, I suppose, broaden that a little bit, if you've got an employee with a disability and they've applied for the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant, and for example, they've purchased a large computer monitor or a piece of software, if 6 months, 12 months later, 2 years later, they change employment, they can take that equipment with them because the equipment has been purchased for them. Now, if there's been, adaptations to the workplace, the widening of doors, obviously, they stay in the workplace, ramps, all that type of thing, they stay in the workplace. But any equipment is the equipment of the employee, and that can travel with them to the next employment.
Okay, thanks for that. There's just a question that has come in surrounding the arts. I'm not really sure. Dermot, I suppose this one is for you as well. It's for people working in the arts sector and they be self-employed and they don't feel that there's enough criteria supports. Do you know if there's anything coming in?
In which area, Emery, for self-employed?
In the arts sector.
Okay, for the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant.
Yeah. Pardon me?
For the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant, is it specifically?
Yeah, it's like, well, the way I'm getting it is that these payments are open to all sectors. It doesn't just have to be arts or
absolutely.
Exactly.
If you're self-employed, once you can show that you are self-employed, then you're eligible for the grants that we've covered here, like the Workplace Equipment Adaptation Grant. You're eligible for Personal Reader Grant, the Job Interview Interpreter Grant. Now, you're not eligible for the Wage Subsidy Scheme, because you can't be financially supported to employ yourself. But you can apply for the WSS to employ other people if you're self-employed, certainly. And you can apply for the DASS, which is the Disability Awareness Support Scheme.
Okay, that's great. And just another question for you, Dermot, while you're there as well. Thanks. If you're on an employment, a CE scheme, could you get the Workplace Adaptation Grant?
No, it's not eligible for community employment. So in that instance, the employer is actually the CE project. So the onus is on the CE project to provide whatever equipment or support you may need. But as part of the CE project, there is an allowance paid through the Department of Social Protection to the CE project, and hopefully that will be able to provide any supports that you may require.
I just have another question for you. They're coming in for you, Dermot.
Yeah.
How long does it generally take for DATS to be given to an employer from the time of the application? And is it a downloadable form?
It's a downloadable form. I had an application last week. Once the application comes in, I would say 2 days, 3 days, really. Once all the documentation is in order, and it's something I specify, I suppose, with all applications. Please make sure that all the documentation is in order. If you're sending in an application for a workplace equipment adaptation grant, you send in the application, but please also send in all the quotations for equipment. So if the documentation isn't in order, that will delay it. But once documentation is in order, I would say 2 days, 3 days max.
Okay, that's great. And I just have a question about the partial capacity benefit here. It's what if I start with partial capacity benefit? I'll take this on myself. What if I start with partial capacity benefit, but I'm not well, I need to take time off again? Okay, so if you come from illness benefit, you can go back onto the illness benefit. Your partial capacity benefit, it's fairly straightforward. And if you come from invalidity, you can go back on for the time you're unwell again, and then you can pick it up again. So just for anybody, because obviously when you start work, there might be periods of time where it may be you're doing more work than you thought you could do more work than you really can. So it's good to know that you can just switch between the two payments. And then another one, Tracy, I have one for you. Is it okay, it's about the rep scheme again. Is it okay if I am a job seeker, can I approach a potential employer myself and inform them about the WEP scheme and see if they're open to going on it?
Absolutely. We would actually really encourage that, because, where there is a lot of promotion around the program, not everybody knows about it. And we would absolutely recommend any of our supports or schemes that an employee approach an employer and say, do you know that you could avail of this, or you could get that if you did this or that? I know it's not their job, but absolutely, yeah, we would fully encourage that.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thanks, Tracy. Sorry, Dermot, just on the DATS, they're just asking the question here, where can you download the form?
On my very last slide, Amory, there was a link to all the various supports. So gov.ie is the website, and as I say, it's available there to download. The applications, in fact, for all the applications. You could also call into your local Intrio office if you wanted to do that as well, just to get it there.
Okay, that's great. And the event has been recorded, so I'm assuming it'll be up everywhere, so someone can make a note of those links then. I think Christabelle has just put it up there. Okay, that's great. Thanks. And I'm just any other questions? Yeah, sorry, Tracy, just one for you there again. It's about the WEP. Can I ask why an employer is not seeking qualifications, education, or previous experience in the placement role?
Yeah, it's part of the criteria. No previous experience is required. They're not allowed to request it. The point of the program is that all the work experience, all the training and the learning is provided by the employer, and with support from the courses or the online learning or the training that they can access. So yeah, absolutely, no experience is required at all.
That's great. Okay, I'm just going to wrap up there now with the questions and answers. I'd just like to thank Christabelle and everyone who organised this again, and thanks everyone for watching, and stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That's great. Thanks so much, and big huge thank you to Tracy, Anne-Marie and Dermot from the Department of Social Protection for joining us today and sharing the information on the available grants and supports. And I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who logged on today and has joined us for all the different sessions, and who's here to celebrate the International Day of Persons with Disability. We're really grateful to have you here. I'd also like to thank the Minister of State for the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Robert Troy, Fiona Ferris of AsIam, Naya Koval of IDA, and career coach Michael Rosny for sharing your insights and experiences as well. And just to finally say, the Open Doors Initiative, we're committed to creating pathways for marginalised members of our society. So whether you're a job seeker or an employer who's looking for extra support or information, please do reach out to us. We have various resources and toolkits that are available. You can get us at info@opendoorsinitiative.ie. So I'm just going to wrap up there today and say one more thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.